Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve, and we know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. How do we find that solution? Where does the nudge come from to help us take the next step and start solving tough problems? This podcast is designed to help you find your catalyst and take that next step. I'm Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. This episode is brought to you by the Catalyst Sale Game Plan. It's our approach to goal setting and execution. If you head to catalystsale.com/game, you can find more information. I am really excited about having Todd Caponi on the podcast this week. Todd is my catalyst. He is a transparency nerd, a sales historian, speaker, and the author of his most recent book, The Transparent Sales Leader, which you will love. We'll include links in the show notes so that you can go out and get the book. Let's get to the conversation. Todd, this conversation has been a long time coming. We have known each other for a while now. We were brought together through Jeff Bajorek, which Jeff's like this super connector out there that has helped me meet some really amazing people, and you are one of those amazing people. So thanks for doing this.
I've been looking forward to this for a while. It's like, when's Mike going to ask me to be on? So it's perfect timing. This is great.
So here's the catalyst for asking you to be on. You've just published a new book, The Transparency Leader. What inspired you to do this now?
Yeah, it's a transparent sales leader.
Sorry. Thank you.
Basically, here's the story on this. When I first got promoted into sales leadership, and I don't know for anybody who's listening to this, they probably feel this, that I was a sales guy. I was a B plus sales guy. I always had a structure, always had a process. But sales leadership was always the thing that I wanted to go for because I knew that was going to be my jam. I got promoted into sales leadership. And within about 48 hours, I realized, where did my structure and my process go? I became this dog chasing a car down the street every morning based on whatever direction the fire is, that's where I'm going. And it would turn and I would turn. And it's things like, personnel issues, a deal issue, forecast, a one-on-one, a board meeting. Every day was crazy. I'm just way too much of a nerd for that. I can't handle that. I don't like to be reactive. I had to be proactive and have a plan. So I literally sat with a whiteboard by myself and it was all right, what are my responsibilities? How do we structure these in a way that I can be proactive? And it became the basis for the book. I used it not only for all my planning and strategizing in that role, and we did really, really well, but then for interviews, for further roles, and it just became the structure for everything that I did. Now, we got to a point here where all of a sudden you see the great resignation going on and you see the need for optimal sales leadership kind of spiking. And then now as things are flipping and we're going into, more of a purge, maybe there's some sales history that we can talk about there that'll get really nerdy. The requirement for optimal sales leadership goes up as the economy goes down. And I was like, I got to get these ideas out there. And so the book is the structure of sales leadership, all optimized by the behavioral science on a bed of what I call kind of sincerity and transparency, which is the optimal combination to get people to want to run behind you, to stay, to do their best and become advocates for your organization. And so that's kind of the book and the why now.
Awesome. And thanks for correcting me on that. I missed transparency sale and transparent sales leader and mix those together. So the power of the book from a structure perspective that I think is absolutely awesome is you start with a framework, then you bring in the research and the data associated with behavioral science, and then you get into myths and then structure out practical application, including some structure around what a call should look like with members of your team and how you can organize these things over a period of time. So if you are looking for a guide that will help you with 1, establishing a framework, 2, understanding the method behind the madness, 3, being able to overcome some of the challenges associated with what people think leadership is, and then be able to go through practical application, this book is for you.
Thank you.
Todd and I are going to talk about a number of different things. There are going to be different points where we cover things that are in the book. Ultimately, you've got to go out and get the book. And by the time this goes live, the audio version of the book will be out there. I know that because Todd has talked about where he's going to record this either in his closet or at Jeff Bajorek's house, or if he wants to make the trip out to Arizona when it gets a little bit cooler, he could come out here. But so let's talk about the purge, because I think this is fascinating. There is a period of time in our history where salespeople were just disappeared. The profession was just completely obliterated. At least it sounds like, based on some of the data you shared. What happened early in the 1900s?
Well, yeah. So I'm a nerd for the history of sales, right? And it just as a hobby, got a collection of books and magazines from the late 1800s through today. But the bulk, there's a huge chunk that I have from 1900 to 1940. I was reading a book from, I think it was 1925, 1926, and they had a chart in it about salesperson turnover, right? And like they had done all this research, and it showed there was 2 data points in it. So 1921, salesperson turnover was 77%.
Okay.
That's crazy, right? And then the next year, 1922, it got worse. It was 85%.
No.
And I'm looking at this and I'm like, what on earth? So I start digging in. I'm going through some of my old stuff. And I had this revelation that, before 1921, that period leading up to it looks exactly like the last 5-6 years in our economy from a micro and macro perspective.
Wow.
So I'll kind of make the equation here, right? So 1914 to 1917, the economy here in the US was slow and steady growth. So it was going well, right? There was no kind of big disruptions, no recessions, anything like that. It looked a lot like 2017 to 2020 here. Then 1918, there was a event that caused the whole economy to shut off for a period of time, right? That was, we entered World War I. We were only in it for a short period of time, but basically the whole economy stopped. Manufacturing production lines shut down to help support the war effort. Everybody stopped doing what they're doing. Exactly like March of 2020, where the economy just shut down for a period of time due to COVID.
Yep.
Doesn't last long. We come out of it not only quickly, but come out of it with an explosion of growth, right? Where we went from, slow and steady growth to this spike. And that was 1919 here. It was the end of 2020 and most of 2021 here currently, to the point where there was one data point. I was looking at Crunchbase, and we had more newly minted unicorns, meaning funded companies, $1 billion plus valuation. We had more in 2021 than we had in the 4 years previous to that combined. And one of those years was a record year in this country, right? Like that's the kind of spike we had here. We had that in 1919, where sales leaders couldn't find enough reps. And even the crappy reps were changing jobs all over the place to chase money. Sound familiar? Then something happened. Here's the craziest part. Massive inflation spike, right? Where inflation just goes, blink. And back then, the economists were calling it like catastrophic at 7%. Ours just was 8.5, 8.25, 8.5, right? So our inflation's actually worse now. And then the bottom dropped out, right? And sales organizations who had, this also may sound familiar, been investing in revenue at all costs, right? All of a sudden we're like, holy crap, we need to make money here. And so they started purging sales teams, right? And there were some that were purging like the largest chunk of their organization and really focused on longevity and profitability. And that's why these teams were turning over so big. So 1920, salesperson turnover was 60%. Here in the US, this last year it was 57. So it's almost exact. Like it's crazy how close it correlates. And that was voluntary turnover. And then it switched to involuntary. And we're starting to see that now. Now, I'm not ringing the hear ye, the end is near bell. But back in January, I was telling people, hey, we got to get prepared for this, because if it looks anything in history, like we as an economy and as a profession tend to step on the same rake over and over again. And it's like, you could see this coming. We need to prepare. And I think there's a lot of other lessons to be learned, but maybe that was a longer explanation you were looking for, but I think it's fascinating.
I think it's absolutely fascinating. What's the old quote? Those who do not study history are damned to repeat it, right?
Exactly.
So I think Ray Dalio highlighted this, I forget how long ago it was, but let's say it was in the last 18 to 24 months. But as he went through and started looking at some of the principal stuff and the data that he was looking at, it wasn't that these things hadn't happened before, it's that they hadn't happened in his lifetime. So he had to go back over a 500-year period of time to look at some data and started to identify some trends and some things that evolve over time. And one of my favorite quotes is the Marie Antoinette quote, which is, "There's nothing new but what we have forgotten." And I butchered the quote, one, because I don't speak French, and I've never translated it directly. But there are, even though this is the first time any of us are going through this kind of scenario, it doesn't mean that somebody else hasn't gone through this scenario before. And if you follow Todd's work, you'll be fascinated by the quotes that he pulls from some of these books. And I think this is another arc to tie into the book. The thing that I was really impressed by in the book is the amount of research and reference notes that are included in the book so that people can go back in and look at where this information has come from. So research is important to you. Why is research important to you?
Well, I mean, part of this whole thing of being a nerd for history is, and like you're saying about history just keeps repeating itself, is I didn't want to write a book that's already been written either, right? Like that's part of the issue. Like so much of this, it's funny that as I read these old books, and there was one thing I was joking with a private equity partner about this, that like I could literally go into LinkedIn every day and just every post that's got a tip in it, pull a quote from 100 years ago and go, this guy talked about it here, right? Like, and he was like, you should do that. Like, that'd just be irritating. And I'd come across as a jerk. But so much of this is just over and over again, right? And so for me, I've had great experiences. I've done a lot, but no one wants a memoir, right? Like what they want is, I want to be able to pull these ideas, these thoughts, these processes, but also there's a treasure trove of behavioral science and advancements that have been made over the last 10 years that have not made it into the sales world fully. Now, psychology and behavioral science, I mean, it goes back as far as 1911, right? Like there's books and research back then where they knew that psychology and behavioral science was important. But what I'm trying to bring to the world is, listen, here's the stuff that we know. Here's a structure. Let's optimize each element by this behavioral science. And I ain't a behavioral science. I'm just a nerd. So like, let's pop those things in. Here's where the research is. And like, that's just the approach that I take. Now, it's funny. A lot of times people that have written new books are like, hey, Todd, have you read this book or this book? I don't, because I've got a process that probably 3 or 4 days a week, I've got a research database that I've got access to through a subscription. That's just new behavioral science reports. And I'll pick a report every day and just read it, because I like to come to my own conclusions. That's why I don't read a lot of the new books, because like I want to read this stuff and go, all right, how would I think about this through the lens? And that's where a lot of the stuff that you'll see in this book has come from.
And when you think about the research that you're doing on the behavioral science side of things, knowing that you're not a behavioral scientist, however, you are going through the process of looking at the research and taking the information that's being put together by people who are behavioral scientists. What's something that's changed for you, let's say in the last 3 years, as a result of information that you've gathered from any of these studies?
Man, which one do I pick? There's like 10. Here, let's go through. I'll take you through 2 kind of counterintuitive ones here.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Number one is, so there's a guy named Dan Ariely. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a Duke University professor, neuroscientist. The guy is like, watch his TED Talk. The guy's brilliant. He did a research study that blew my mind. And it was about, here's the study. Imagine that you go into a lab and there's people come into this lab and they're tasked with building a kind of a Lego model. It's got 40 parts to it, right? And so they're going to be paid for each Lego model that they build. So they build it and then they're paid and then they build another one. All right. But they're split into 2 groups. Group number 1, that's the task. Build the Lego model. When we're done, we're going to put it on the shelf behind us. I'm going to pay you and then I'm going to have you do another one. Right. And like, we'll see how many you do before you're like, screw it. Group 2, same task, build the Lego model, same pay, exact same pay. However, as you're building model number 2, I, as the proctor in this thing, are going to disassemble what you just built, put it back in the box, and then that'll be the next one that you built, right? So as you're building, I'm going to take it apart, and then you're going to rebuild it.
Okay.
Same task, same pay. Group 2 did about half as many. Now, let's take that to the way that my brain was looking at this from a sales and sales leadership perspective.
Yep.
Every year, actually, even after every deal, we take the reps and we're like, hey, good for you. Thanks for building last year. We're going to disassemble it because that was last year. You're going to rebuild it, but I need you to rebuild it bigger and maybe for a little less pay because your quota just went up. Now, what are we doing? Well, two things. Number one is just looking at that whole idea of we as a human being are engaged and motivated by seeing the fruits of our labor over the long term. I built that and I want to build more of it. And to be able to see that just drives you to want to stay, want to perform, want to do your best work. When it's disassembled in front of you, subconsciously, it's driving those individuals to go, all right, I'm going to go do it again. But why? I don't even see it anymore because, hey, last year was last year. So that's number one. Number two is what is that practice of starting over at zero actually doing? It's incentivizing or rewarding your lowest performers and penalizing your top performers, right? Because your top performers and your low performers are now at the starting line at zero again. So you've just motivated the people maybe you don't care as much about and demotivated. And so I'm not saying that we need to get rid of starting over at zero, but this is just one of those elements that like, what ways can we look at making sure that the people that built something get to see it and feel that the impact that they're making on the organization is there for the long term? I mean, that's one of them that really jumped out at me that I'm like, crap, we've been doing that wrong just because it's something you just do.
One of the quotes I pulled from the book, and I didn't write the name of the person who put this quote, who you quoted, but it was, we are not thinking machines. We are feeling machines that think.
Exactly. It's Antonio Damasio. So yeah, he's a neuroscientist that he wrote Descartes' Error back in the late 1990s.
Okay.
And yeah, and the quote is, yeah, we are not thinking machines that feel. We're feeling machines that think. And that we derive all of our decisions and our engagement through the limbic, which is in the middle of our brain. And then we justify and back all of that up through our neocortex, which is the logic center, right? And like, I think that's just such an important piece to this, that we can logic all over people as leaders, as salespeople trying to sell to individuals, but it's not the logic that drives the decision. We need to create a feeling and an emotion. Now, in that Descartes' Error book by Antonio Damasio, he's got some stories in there that'll blow your mind about people that have lost access to the limbic through either cancer or injury, and they lose their ability to make decisions. It's crazy. So anyway, that's a side topic.
Well, I'd like to get into a discussion around decision making, and as we go through this, one of the things that jumps out at me is you're talking about the Lego experiment. Are we creating risk inside organizations by over-specializing individual sales roles? Over-specialization, is that creating? It seems like over-specialization and then comp plan design create some pretty interesting challenges around this, building Lego models up, being able to see it up on the shelf versus building Lego models out and tearing them down each time. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think that over-specialization is really important. I'll give you, and especially in times where things get tight.
Okay.
I'll tell you a quick story about that. Back in 2008, so the Great Recession, I was the VP of worldwide sales for a company called Right Hemisphere. They no longer exist because we did some things right, grew the company 400% and sold it to SAP in 2011. But here's what happened. 2008, we're struggling. And there's a tendency in all of us to go, oh, crap, pipeline doesn't look good. Let's cast a wider net, right? Just, let's fire it, just get whatever we can in. Now, this was not my idea, right? It was like a conversation with my CEO. From a behavioral science perspective, we were like, let's do the opposite. Instead of casting a wider net, let's tighten the net. We had some success in aerospace and defense. Our technology was a software that really helped discrete manufacturers. So anybody that takes lots of parts, brings them together to build something like cars, airplanes, boats, like all that. That was our jam. But aerospace and defense, we saw some momentum in. So we came up with this idea that, hey, for all our reps, we didn't have many because we had to go through a layoff. We're like, look at your list. I want you to pick out the aerospace and defense companies. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring in, so we've hired a consultant on retainer that was in the aerospace and defense industry for 20 years. He's going to come in and do lunch and learns with you and teach you everything about what they care about, what they read, how they're measured. Like, we're going to go really, really tight there. The marketing department's going to do case studies on all of our aerospace and defense clients. And then we're going to teach you those. We're going to go like crazy on aerospace and defense. Doesn't mean you can't call on everybody else, But then the reps just naturally gravitated to aerospace and defense. They almost got a mini MBA in that space. The next thing you know, we were like doing 3 or 4 million. We did a $7 million deal with Boeing, right? So double the company with one deal. And then we get Gulfstream, we get Cessna, we got Northrop Grumman. All of a sudden, we're just like boom, 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 because I'm a believer that you tighten. I call it extreme firmographic focus in the book. But that tightening, confidence is contagious, man. Like when you get confident, that comes across. You start being seen as an asset to your buyers instead of kind of a necessary evil. But your confidence grows. And the next thing you know, you're adding value to these people. They're gravitating to you. And all of a sudden, your pipeline's growing. So we did that and it worked so well, we slowly started going out, right? So in Houston, that rep was like, hey, oil and gas, is there anybody we can hire here? And it was like, yeah, 20 grand, we'll bring somebody in and make you an expert on that because that'll pay itself off in like a month. And we got Halliburton and Schlumberger. Here in the Midwest, we did the same thing with heavy manufacturing. We get Caterpillar and Deere. And all of a sudden, we're just like on fire. And SAP's like, who are those guys? I'm a believer in specialization from a sales perspective, that you've got 500 accounts or however many accounts you can go on. Go deep on one. Your customers want to see you be successful. They'll contribute. Figure out what they read, how they're measured. Ask them, hey, can I see your inbox? And show me what emails stand out and which ones look like white noise to you. And the next thing you know, you're going to develop a confidence. You're going to develop a magnetism to that space. Your pipeline's going to grow from it, and then you can grow out slowly. And that's advice I've been giving a lot of companies lately is don't cast a wider net. Go tighter, hire experts to help you. And the next thing you know, you'll be growing faster than you thought you could.
Yeah, and I think the specialization from an ideal customer perspective and targeting and territory planning and all of that kind of stuff, super, super important. That level of focus through lines of clarity is really powerful. What I'm wondering about, though, is more about specialization, trends that we see at a people level and role level inside organizations. And if you go to the Predictable Revenue book by Aaron Ross, you go through this, hey, this is the model that made Salesforce what Salesforce is today. History is written by those who won the war. It's another one of the quotes that's out there. There's the survivorship bias piece. But what I'm wondering about is when you inside organizations, are we specializing in BDR, SDR, then AE, then AM, or now they're not even AMs anymore. Now they're called customer success. And customer success is this new thing, but it's actually been around for a long period of time. I'm sure there's something that you've got in a book where they were talking about the importance of customer success way back in the 1900s. And if we went back even further, that was an important structure inside organizations. But what about from a team perspective inside the makeup of people inside? Do some organizations specialize too soon? Do they over-specialize? Are they creating some challenges inside their business because, and I don't mean to be leading the witness here, but it sounds like that's what I'm doing as I'm going through this. But are we creating these specialized roles that seem like they make sense inside the organization from a conveyor belt perspective? And a Henry Ford, we're going to go ahead and do the assembly line thing, but then they completely break the experience on the customer side. So any thoughts on that? Yeah,
I got lots of them, as you might imagine. I'm going to answer it a different way.
Okay.
I believe that, if you ask a sales leader or in any organization, are you buyer centric? They're going to go, of course we're buyer centric. Yes, of course. However, all their systems and processes are seller centric, right? And that's one of them. Like the way that they do that conveyor belt structure. One of the things that I talk about in the book that I think is, I've actually gotten nerdier after the book has come out on this one, is just like, that example that you just said is one big one. There's another one. 100 years ago, forecasting, right? Sales forecasting wasn't really a problem, right? Like all those books, they have the same problems, the same issues. They face the same objections. They've got all the same issues except forecasting. I can't find one article where leaders are like, gosh, I suck at forecasting. And I figured out why. And it's go back to Blake. So Alec Baldwin, Glengarry Glen Ross, he gives that speech on his chalkboard that like last time I watched it, I cried myself to sleep afterwards. But here's the thing. He got
Did you take a shower first?
I don't think I did. I think I was too busy crying. Don't let that be me. But, it's funny. He did get one thing right. AIDA. So he's got AIDA on the board. Now, he got one of the words wrong. But AIDA was actually theorized back in 1898 by a guy named Elias St. Elmo Lewis, who theorized that every buyer goes through 4 stages on their buying journey, right? Attention is the A, right? Like, are they paying attention? Interest, have we developed an interest in what we're providing to them? The D is desire, right? Do they now desire it? And then A is action. Are they ready to take action? AIDA. It became the basis for every single sales process and every sales forecast methodology till at least the 1940s. Everyone, books, everyone in 1910, they got it. I think it was 1925, there's a book that's just like conceded AIDA, right? Like the author's like, I'm not going to talk about it because every author or anybody who knows sales knows it's AIDA. Everyone. I'm going to say that like 15 times because you look to today, not one, 0 do AIDA. And if you buy your HubSpot or your Salesforce or any of your CRM instances, what are the stages and the processes that come right out of the box? All seller-centric, right? Qualification, discovery, demo, proposal, right? We are literally creating Henry Ford assembly line processes that are driving every endorphin rush a sales rep has. And we're teaching sales reps that, hey, listen, the way you get paid is to go through this process and to check these milestones on seller activities. Who knew that trying to predict when a buyer would buy should be done based on recognizing buyer behavior? Oh, that's crazy, right? Of course. Well, that's one of those things that we keep looking at going, well, we know we have to follow that process, so let's make them. And then we end up building structures within our organizations to support that, right? The discovery and qualification. Why am I paying an expensive sales rep to do that when I can get some SDRs that had a lemonade stand in junior high to do it and pay them minimum wage, right? And then all of a sudden you create these silos that help you on that sales process structure, but are not teaching anybody to recognize buyer behavior. And as a result, our impact is lower, our forecasting accuracy becomes lower, and we go, I wonder why, right? So it's a bit of a long way of answering that, but I think we all, as sales leaders and as organizations, if we're going to say we're buyer focused, there's an opportunity to look at your forecasting and your processes and layer in recognizing buyer behavior. You start there, and then you build your internal structures to support helping the buyer through. And it doesn't have to be AIDA. It can be, why change, why you, why not, right? And understanding and recognizing that, just that switch is going to not only make your forecasting more accurate right away, but it's going to make your reps more empathetic. And then it'll inform the structures that you need to take to help drive buyers to optimal outcomes. Scale that.
This is one of the reasons I'm excited and still skeptical and call bullshit on a lot of the acronyms that are out there. But I'm still excited about it because at least people are talking about it. The challenge is we end up throwing a number of different acronyms and for all intents and purposes end up meaning about the same thing. We throw things out like GTM. We throw things out like PLG. We throw things out like, I heard the other day someone was talking about customer-led growth. Like we've got all of these words that we throw around that end up, it's funny, it goes back to the marketing piece, which is what I wonder if that was the demise of sales way back when. We decided marketing just did a much better job at presenting things so we could eliminate the sales function in these gap areas. But we come up with these words, go-to-market, RevOps, PLG, and I know if you go out and you define each of those, they mean something slightly different, but functionally the outcome is the same. And it's around designing for a positive customer experience that helps accelerate speed to impact so that we start solving tough problems inside organizations so that those businesses can thrive, so that they can grow, so that we can grow, so that the people inside the organizations can thrive. And everybody feels like they fit in a really good place inside the organization and people know what Legos they're putting together. Is there a positive thing that's happening with many of these models that more and more people are starting to talk about?
Well, dude, I mean, you've opened a Pandora's box there too, man. It's like, it's funny. You talked about like marketing replacing sales, what year that happened, just a data point. We always hear this phrase, buyers know more nowadays, right? Like you hear that phrase and you think, and like, it's always followed by like our salespeople really needed the way they were before. Well, buyers know more nowadays. That quote is from Thomas Herbert Russell's 1911 book, Salesmanship.
1911. Hold on. So in 1911, buyers were picking up their cell phones and they were scrolling web pages. They had access to all of this amazing information. Like that was what happened in 1911?
It was marketing and advertising, right? Like he was talking about is because of the proliferation of advertising that salespeople are no longer as necessary. And it was a threat to the profession, right? That's 1911. You fast forward all the way to 2015, Forrester created their State of Sales report. It was April of 2015. You can probably still Google it. And they claimed that due to the proliferation of e-commerce, the sales profession would practically go away and that 1 million B2B salespeople would disappear by 2020 and that hundreds of thousands of college-age graduates would not enter the profession because of e-commerce. And the opposite happened in each one. And my theory on all of this is like, why has the profession continued to flourish? Number one is that we do evolve well. But number two is the proliferation of information has not made it easier for buyers. It's actually made it harder, right? And our role, I think if we view the role and the future of the sales profession as to be less about convincing, right? Like we don't buy when we're convinced. If we do, probably pissed about it in a couple hours. We buy when we can predict. Right. And that our role as salespeople is to remove friction from that prediction process, do the homework for the buyer. It's kind of it's the basis of the first book, The Transparency Sale, really is this idea of transparency. Like, hey, I've done the homework for you. Here's what you're not going to like. And if that's a problem, let's talk about it now. But we give that up to be great at this. And this is what we're great at. And we help them predict. Right. I believe that's the future of sales is to help buyers do the homework, cull through it and predict. And so with that in mind, let's look at all of these acronyms and phrases and where things are going. There are some pieces that I like, but like product-led growth and customer-led growth and all that, like that should always be the case, right? Like it should always, like you said, great experiences for the customers where they want to stay, they want to buy more, and they want to create advocacy for you. Well, yeah, that's customer and product-led growth. Like, I don't know about you, but my business right now is 100% inbound and referral. Like that's product-led growth, but it's got nothing to do with me studying a white paper on product-led growth and building. It's about creating great experiences for customers and focusing on their outcomes so that they want to come back. And so
that's it. Like, so that's where the business, my business has been built on referrals.
Exactly. That's it. And so when you look at the technologies and everything, I mean, there's another rant in there that I don't want to go too deep on, but
go deep. Come on, Todd. Let's go.
That's right. Well, all right. So here's another rant. When you look today at, like, you go on LinkedIn, there's so many posts and conversations about the fact that we are in a sales technology revolution, right? that sales tech is filling every remaining crevice in the sales profession, right?
Every one of them.
Yeah. Like there's like a slide that's got all the logos in it. And there's like 5,000 companies that are doing sales tech now. And like a few years ago, it was marketing tech. That's not a good thing. And here's why. My argument is that the greatest sales technology revolution happened when the notorious AGB, Alexander Graham Bell, in March of 1876 made the first telephone call, right? Like that was the biggest sales technology revolution, that first phone call. And it should have changed the sales profession for the better, right? 1910 is when I first found the first evidence of it being used in B2C cold calling.
Okay.
So cold calling started, I actually have the script that I found, and I did a whole podcast episode on these scripts. 1914 was the first B2B one that I saw. Technology like the telephone, right? Amazing. I don't even have to leave my house, right? I can just make phone calls. We ruined it. Salespeople ruined it. By the 1960s, we needed technologies built to help prevent salespeople from selling through Dr. Shirley Jackson's invention of caller ID. That didn't work. And we got all the way to the government having to jump in. And like Alexander Graham Bell would be rolling over in his grave if he knew that there are now 221 million phone numbers on the do not call registry in the US, right? He'd just be like, what did you a-holes do to my technology? Like, he'd be so mad. And then we did it again with email, right? Like email, this incredible gift where I can send you a note, hit enter, and it shows up in your inbox right now. I can see when you've opened it too. Like, how incredible is that for sales? And we ruined it again. Technologies had to be created, right? Through IP blacklists and spam filters and all of that. That didn't work. government had to get involved in 2003 and George Bush signed into law the Can Spam Act, right?
It scares the crap out of me that we're going to do the same thing with text messages too. Like,
well, yeah, we're doing it with all of these things, text messages, like my LinkedIn. Look at my connection.
LinkedIn is successful. We can't have nice things.
Exactly. Now, there are a couple that I think could be good if used for good and used through that lens of buyer outcomes, right? Video is one of those things, right? Video, when I was in my last role as CRO of Power Reviews, the video started popping up. And I was like, oh, you jerks ruined this one too, right? Like my inbox, I get an inbox and it's like, hey, Todd, I recorded this short video for you. And like I would click on it and the video would be like, hey, you're with this company. And then like this cheesy logo of my company. And I'm like, you just freaking are batch and blasting video? Like, are you insane? To the point where I stopped watching videos. But I think video creates this opportunity that, if done right, establishes our face. Because that's the big problem, right? When we lost our face, back in the early 1900s, sales required a face-to-face conversation. I had to look you in the eyes and have a conversation with you. The telephone, email, all these technologies that are like blasted out, scale, and I don't even have to look at you. If you're pissed, who cares? I move on. That's where we started to ruin it. I think video, when done right, that's one opportunity that I think we can fix this and we can help buyers and we can make connections. And then number two is AI done right. Like I'm seeing that like Gong just released something that looks at forecasting and looks at recognizing buyer behavior to help inform forecasting. That's got to make it into our processes and our mindsets and our empathy. But there are some pieces here and there that when done right, I think have an opportunity to help us. But for the most part, technology has done more harm than good.
Let's talk about empathy just for a minute, because I think this is one of those words where I've joked about it before. It's kind of like the scene in The Princess Bride where you keep using that word, but I don't think you really know what it means. What is empathy? What does empathy mean to you?
Well, yeah, when you look at LinkedIn, I read like, hey, empathy is really important. And then what they describe is sympathy, right? And like, that's what they do over and over again. Like, April of 2020 was like a case study in wrong use of empathy, right? Like, hey, I'm being empathetic when I'm asking, I hope you're doing well in these trying times. Like that's not empathy, right?
Hey, hold on, Todd, I thought that was my unique message out to people. You mean there were other people saying the same thing?
Yeah, who knew, right? And it's just like, oh, this person really gets me. Like, no, nobody did that, right? Now, it's funny when you think about, when you go to medical school, for example, right?
I've never been to medical school.
Oh, really? Yeah. So like medical school, like, you go there, let's say you want to become a doctor, and like a big part of what you learn is like, the neck bone's connected to the head. Like you learn all that stuff, but they spend a lot of time on this idea of clinical empathy, right? Which is, if you're going to be a successful doctor, it's not just about your knowledge. It's about your ability to connect, see the world through the eyes of the individual you're dealing with, and be able to experience the highs and the lows with them. Yeah. Right? Like that is pure clinical empathy, to be able to have conversations and know what's going on inside the brains of those individuals so that you're kind of optimally like giving them confidence in this whole process, right? That's empathy. See the world through the eyes of the individual you're speaking to and then experiencing highs and lows along with them. Now, I know doctors, they have to actually, there's a whole piece about not experiencing the lows with them, the lows of the lows. Otherwise, they'd all hate their jobs forever. But as sales professionals, there's a huge opportunity to do that. And I'll give you one tip here. It was something that we did. I was on the sales leadership team of a company called Exact Target. We were in the kind of the SaaS marketing space. We grew the business, IPO'd, sold it to Salesforce for $3 billion back in 2013. It was an incredible experience, incredible run. But one of the things that we did that I believe is simple application for salespeople and sales teams as it relates to empathy is this. We were selling to marketers, right? Right down the hallway is our CMO. He's a marketer, right? He's got a whole department of marketers right there. Hey, so what we did is like the CMO, we'd bring him into a sales meeting once a month. And we'd just be like, all right, Tim, just share with us, like, what are you working on? What's your priority? What are you reading? How are you measured? Like, how are things going? What are new trends that you're seeing? And then we'd always ask them, show us your inbox, right? Like what's standing out and what looks like crap. And then the next week we'd bring a digital marketer. Next week we'd bring somebody who's working on a different like social channel. Like we would go through and bring different marketers in. And the next thing you know, we have empathy for what these individuals we're targeting are dealing with, reading, We're going and reading the same things, how they're measured, what stands out in their inbox. And the next thing you know, we're differentiating in the way we sell. I think there's that up. You're selling a product. You probably have people that are doing product in your company. You're selling to finance. Hey, there's probably accountants, right? Like, or if you don't have those types of people in your organization, you probably have customers that care about your success. Go ask them, like, hey, just spend a half an hour with us and, once in a while. And like, this is the type of stuff that would help us out a ton. That's how you gain empathy, is to be able to see the world through their eyes instead of just, slapping it out there and going, I hope you're doing all right in these trying times, right? Like, that's not empathy.
This is such an important practice to apply in your business. And it does not matter what role you have in your business. Your business is your business, whether you're an SDR doing outreach or you're a learning and development professional delivering learning solutions inside an organization, or you're a new business owner, or you're an executive of a large team, whatever that is. There are people inside your organization who look like the people that you like to sell to. They have the problems that you solve. There are people inside your network who have those problems. Work with them, ask questions, and then ask the follow-up question, who else would you recommend I talk to about this? Because they all talk to each other, because they're trying to solve the problems that they each have. They're not looking for someone to create problems. They've already got enough of their own. So take this piece of practical advice and execute on it immediately. Before the end of this week, identify 2 people inside your organization that you can talk to that look like your ideal customer and from a role perspective, and have a conversation with them.
I'm going to add one thing to that too. So there's one other thing that I've seen companies like sales leaders do wrong. And I may have done this wrong at some point in my career too. If your team, your reps, or you as an individual rep or even a leader, if the purpose of why you show up at work every day is for money, like if you're money motivated, somebody above you is doing something wrong. Like, that's number one. That money should be the reward for doing work we love to do, not the reason you do it. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. So like, that's number one. The number 2 piece of that is, if the whole reason for your work, your mission, your purpose, the reason you get out of bed in the morning is to hit your quota, you're also doing it wrong. As a sales leader, do your teams know what their work means to you, your company, your customers, and your customers' customers? Like, get all the way there and get cheesy with it. Because otherwise, you could teach them and bring in these experts all day long, and your reps will be like, all right, cool. But if their work actually means something and they start to care about these individuals and their outcomes, all of a sudden they're consuming this stuff. And like, I had reps. So Power Reviews was my last company. We were in the ratings and reviews space, selling technology that allowed retailers and brands to collect and display ratings and reviews on their website. Who gives a shit? You know who gives a shit? The consumers that are taking their hard-earned dollars and making investments in stuff that they need that make an impact on their personal lives. We were helping individuals make really important decisions with their short supply of money that were impacting their lives. Once our reps started to feel that, I had a couple of reps that were like the biggest review nerds you've ever seen. And they're like 25 years old. And they're like, they loved reviews. That's a responsibility of you as a leader, is to drive that passion into your team, so that when we would, like, I remember we were in Arizona, as a matter of fact, there was a customer event. We went out to dinner with a couple of customers. And I remember this 25-year-old rep, his name was Kevin. He was asking this like SVP of e-commerce, super intelligent. Like, the conversation they were having was like, I can't believe this guy is 25 years old and he's having this conversation. But it was because he really freaking cared about customer outcomes and not just about hitting his number.
I think one of my favorite questions to ask people is, why do you do what you do? And when I was doing some coaching and training with an organization that we worked with a number of years ago, and the CEO of the company asked me, he's like, I don't understand why you're asking this question. What does it mean? Why do we care? We don't care why they do. We want to be able to show them how we can help them avoid whatever it was. And I don't want to say too much because they'll just reveal the organization. And ultimately what it highlighted was a lack of perspective, a lack of empathy, and a lack of understanding of the emotion that happens on the buyer side. Like, there's knowing why somebody does the work that they do is pretty powerful, because once you understand it, then you understand who can I connect them with, who also has a deep care about that type of work? And why do they get up in the morning and come and do this thing? And we can ask it not only of our customers, do it. Ask your customers, why do they do the work that they do? We could also ask it of our team, and not at your annual performance review or your semi-annual performance review where it's on a sheet of paper where someone's going to check a couple of boxes or hit a couple of radio buttons and then have the data go into a database. Like, deeply care about others. In what you'll find in this, and I think this is really powerful what Todd's sharing here, it highlights that if you struggle answering that question, you might be in the wrong place. You might be in the wrong vertical. You might be in the wrong industry. And then the next thing is to go back through and start to do some really deep work on yourself and figure out, where do you belong, so that you can do that inside organizations. There are companies out there who actually put stonework inside houses, like people who love the craft of building. And Todd went through the process of buying a boat recently. Like, there are people who are really excited about the experience that people have when they take a boat out on a lake. You can find a place to fit. So, Todd, absolutely awesome conversation. So, getting back into the book, and just broadly speaking, because that was the catalyst for us having the conversation, is Todd released a new book. The book is out there. It is available. The Transparent Sales Leader is out there for you to purchase. Go buy it, read it, embrace it, and you'll start to address some gaps that you have inside your organization at any level of your progression as a sales leader. There's a framework that you lay out, the 5 F's that you lay out. Why are frameworks important for people?
Well, it's the thing that when times get tough, right, you've got to have something to fall back on. But you need so for me, the 5 F's, I'll kind of rattle them off for everybody, so you've got them. But you as a leader, right, a revenue leader of any type, and when I've shared this with like my CEO before and marketing, they're like, yeah, those are my 5 too. All of your responsibilities fall into one of 5 categories. Now, me being the dumbass that I am, I needed to make it alliterative, so they all start with F, right? Because otherwise I wasn't going to remember. But literally, you could spend 10 minutes and just memorize them. And then you could spend 20 minutes and create a 30, 60, 90-day plan for yourself right now. Like, literally, when you get done with the 5 F's, you could go, I got it. Here's where we are. Here's where we need help. Here's the plan to fix them. The first F you've got a responsibility for ongoing and initially is to focus, meaning you've got to make sure that your team is utilizing their most important asset they have in their inventory that they can turn into anything, and that's their time. And focus means working the right opportunities, the right companies, the right verticals, the right individuals within those, in certain cases, the right prerequisites. Like I'm working with a company right now where the company, that their targets need to have a system in place that this technology plugs into. And if you don't, they're not a good customer. So that's focus.
Good.
Once you've established your focus, you got to maintain it too. I used to have a policy that it was called no science projects, right? Like, focus. Once you've built that focus, you then build a field organization to support that focus. So the field is having the right team, the right people, the right experience in the right spots with the right tools, the right resources, the right comp, right? Like, that's all field to support the focus, not the other way around. Your third F, ongoing, initially, always, is to the fundamentals. So you as a leader got a responsibility to make sure that your team is doing the right things right, whether it's discovery, qualification, prospecting, messaging, positioning, presenting, negotiating, like that whole thing. Fundamentals, you've got a responsibility to. Your fourth F, initially and ongoing, is to the forecast, right? You got to predict the future. You've got to be able to forecast. You got to know what to measure, the KPIs. I've got something in the book that I call it's the results formula that I had read about like 20 years ago and kind of made it my own, that I think will make KPIs and measuring a lot easier for you. And then the fifth F, ongoing and always, maybe the cheesiest, but we've talked a little bit about it here, which is fun. You've got a responsibility to build a culture that is maximizing the intrinsic inspiration of your team. So they want to show up, they want to stay, they want to do their best, they want to perform, and they want to advocate for you. That's the 5 F's, right? Once you internalize those, then you can create a plan. I used it for all my planning and strategizing. I used it for all my communications, up, down, side to side, board meetings, one-on-ones with my leaders. They used it with their leaders, their reps. It was the agenda for board meetings. So I would come in and they'd be like, all right, Todd, time for the sales update. And they're like, what are we going to talk about? And I was like, guess. And they're like, it's the F and 5 Fs again. I'm like, of course it is. Right? Of course. But they always knew that I was bulletproof. I used it for interviews. I had to do due diligence on companies. I used it for that, right? It becomes your framework so that you can see the holes before they form. You can stop being that dog chasing the car down the street. And now you're the car with the GPS inside. And that's the core of why structures and frameworks matter, is that instead of chasing and then all of a sudden there's been a hole forming over here for 3 months that you didn't see. And now it's a freaking, it's a canyon and you can't dig out of it. You can start to see those things ahead of time. Just having a framework, literally memorize those 5 Fs, start using them. You will be ahead of 99% of the other sales leadership world, like instantly. There was one time, there's a story in the book that I talk about where I was called world class. I don't know if I was world class, like by any means. I think it just was because I had a structure and a framework and I thought about it in a methodical way instead of a random, hey, this is going on, right? And it makes you sound really, really smart and I could use all the help I can get.
This is one of the things that drives me absolutely another F into it. One of the Fs that you
Yes.
F and mad is when founders are looking to transition from founder-led sales to like a founder-amplified sales or a next level, and they want to hire teams. And they get frustrated, another F, we'll have a little fun with this. They get frustrated with the fact that these new reps that they have aren't able to sell the way that they sell. And then when you go back in and you start to break out how they've sold and where deals have come together, they struggle with being able to clearly articulate the path that these things went along. And then you go through the question, you say, okay, given the importance of design inside your organization from a technical perspective and the way that you deliver products out to the marketplace, if you're unable to clearly state this in the way that you've gone to market, how do you expect that to transfer over to somebody else who's new? And oh, by the way, you want to save money, so let's go ahead and hire a junior rep to do this. Or let's go the opposite side. Let's overpay for an executive from a big company who hasn't been through the 0 to 1 process. So what's really cool about a framework like the one that Todd lays out in the book and the structure that he applies is it's not just about theory. This is not a framework that sounds good and gets fluffy and all of those other kinds of things. It's something that you can lay out on a grid. You can assess your capability relative to each of these definitions that are out there. And then you can start to understand where the gaps are between your current state, your desired state, the continuum, and you start working against those and integrate that into your 30, 60, 90 so that you can build something, build a plan that you can actually go in and execute on. And that is the thing that I love about Todd's book. Many things I love about Todd's book. One, the research and the detail that went into building it. Starting with a framework, getting into some of the behavioral science and structure around how humans work with each other and how that changes or has changed, how important that is in the way that you work with your team. Then getting into some of the myths and challenges that are out there where people will say that these things are true, but they're really not. And you've got to be aware of some of those gaps, because if you're not aware of them, they'll create distraction. You'll lose that focus. And then pulls it into a clear structure for how you can manage your meetings with people. So there's not only the information, but there's practical application. Go out there and get the book. Todd, this conversation has been absolutely awesome. Where would you like people to find out more about what you're working on, and where can they connect with you directly?
Well, yeah, I'm kind of annoyingly everywhere, which is interesting. I hired a publicist, which is nuts.
Why did you hire a publicist?
Yeah, just to help me do a lot of that back end work, right? Because I just don't have the bandwidth. So I'm writing articles and then they pitch them to all the magazines and all that. It's been really an interesting process.
Awesome.
So I'm annoyingly all over the place. But toddcaponi.com is just a simple place to go. Or you can follow me. I do share a bunch of my nonsense on LinkedIn, or connect with me and let me know where you heard me. But those are really the two core places. But yeah, I'm a Google search away pretty much everywhere.
If you know of somebody who would get value from this conversation, please share it with them. We'll include links in the show notes. Let Todd and I know via LinkedIn that you listened to the episode and whatever it was that you found interesting. As you share that, people will start to amplify that message, and it helps spread the word out there. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?